When you get to a point where you can focus your attention on that simple movement of air in and out, this really magical thing starts to happen where you start to see that everything that you are perceiving around you, the reality that is in front of you, is all being created in your mind. From Mezclada, this is the Transcendent Farmer podcast, created to inspire and empower the next generation of land stewards, with your host, Emily Reno. This episode of the Transcendent Farmer podcast is sponsored by Compeer Financial, a member-owned farm credit cooperative providing financial products and services to support agriculture and rural communities in Illinois, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. Compeer Financial is the third largest cooperative in the farm credit system. Based in the upper Midwest with $31.9 billion in total assets, they take a forward-thinking approach to provide innovative, customized financial solutions and expertise to meet the unique needs and dreams of those they serve. Contact Cy Tao, Senior Lending Specialist, at 612-597-4086 or by email at cy.tao, that's sai.thao, at compeer.com. Compeer Financial is an equal opportunity employer and provider and an equal credit opportunity lender. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Transcendent Farmer podcast. I'm so stoked for my guest today, or interviewer, I should say, because we're doing things a little bit different. I'm actually going to be interviewed by the infamous Dawn Finn, and I just wanted to give a little bit of background on who she is, because this is the first time that I've had her on. I'm sure it will not be the only time. We've talked a lot about developing our own series and just chatting at length about different topics that are relevant to this audience. And we met back in 2020. It was very cool because the initial conversation and connection was definitely on these maybe more spiritual and kind of esoteric topics and ideas. And then it was cool to see how things evolved over time, that our professional interests overlapped, and you just really welcomed me with open arms, no pun intended, to the Welcome Places office in Pelican Rapids, Minnesota, where you gave me desk space. And that was huge because I had just moved to this small town, didn't know anybody. I was working remotely for this regional organization, and all of us were kind of spread out across the region. Most of us were working from home at that point. And so to be able to kind of have my boots on the ground, if you will, in the community and getting to know people in that way, it was just so special. And I think the connection and just, I don't know, the charisma that we can share back and forth, it's always felt so effortless with you. Dawn is just an incredible leader. She is so intuitive and strong-willed and driven, and it's such an honor to get to learn with you, from you. And I'm so glad that you get to be the one to interview me about this topic in particular, because this is the first time that we're really covering my experiences with this yoga teacher training, and I think it's gonna be great.
I'm excited. So, just to let you know, my open arms was because my soul opened up. The minute you walked in and we started talking and we had some of the same interest, my soul was like, yes, this is the person you've been waiting for to visit with you, to challenge, open everything you possibly can to invite this beautiful soul in. And so that's really how I began my journey with you. And I am grateful that you asked me to do this, first of all. Second of all, I love living through your experiences because we come from different backgrounds. So watching you go out and play and grow and learn also helps stretch me. So what a beautiful relationship. Isn't that what we're here for, is to help each other stretch? And so with
Yes.
that, I have great gratitude. Are you ready to dive in?
Love it. Yes, let's do it.
So I want to know, what is your background or upbringing that actually brought you to really liking yoga or considering this journey of yoga? Because most people don't know even what yoga is, but I'm sure your listeners do.
Mm-hmm.
So, talk a little bit about what
Mm-hmm.
is yoga, just for those who don't, and then really, what was your background? How did you get here? How did you make that decision to travel across the world and attend a training in India? Wow, blew
Mm-hmm.
my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people seek out the local opportunities, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But, and I'll get into this, there is a reason that I did want to go to India to do that training. But yoga, so yoga is defined in a lot of ways. There's many different parts to what yoga is. And I think that was one of the things that I feel like I understand a lot better. My first introduction to yoga as an asana practice, which is referring to this movement that you have on your mat, putting your body in certain positions, focusing on your inhale, exhale as you do that. A lot of times they say, in the Western world, we focus on it as this exercise based activity. And that was my introduction. I had the great privilege of getting to participate in a summer fitness program as part of a women's gym in my hometown in Lawrence, Kansas, Body Boutique. And my sister and I, we participated in this where they would give you access to different prizes and stuff if you went to the gym so many numbers of times. And it was a Lace Mills gym. So they did these things that were choreographed movements to music, and each song or track would focus on a different part of the body. And so the class that really exposed me to yoga as an asana practice movement was called Body Flow. And I'll never forget walking out of that first class. And my sister and I were on the same level. It was just like, whoa, I feel like I'm floating on a cloud right now. And I think I literally was just giggling because I was so high from the experience and the meditation at the end, where you just kind of let your body relax. And they're telling you to imagine yourself sinking into the floor as if it were sand. And you just have your weight so heavy. And I think that up until that point, and I still struggle with this today, there's just so much movement in my life and always focusing on what's coming next and going here, there. And it was just this wonderful pause. And after that, I kept going to different yoga classes. I went to Body Flow for quite a while, but then throughout high school and then in my early years of college, started to get more exposure through different studios of, like, even when I went to visit my sister in Australia for the first time back in 2017, early 2018, did Bikram yoga, which is its own style. Again, mainly based on this fitness piece of a very strict set of movements and sequences. And so I got exposure to a little bit of meditation through that, pranayama, which is this controlled sort of inhale and exhale. And then, of course, through social media and whatnot, there were people that would talk about things like breath of fire, where you're exhaling maybe in a certain way to generate heat within your body. And then there were so many different styles that I got exposed to. That pretty much up to the point that I went to India in December of this last year was what I kind of knew yoga to be. And there's this whole other side to it that has to deal with the philosophy and the ethos and a really, really long history of yoga as a practice, not just of the body, but of the mind and as a way of being. And I kind of knew that that was a thing. And I wanted to pursue that in a deeper way. And so I had been saving for almost 3 years leading up to the point of doing this training. And the plan was to do it in partnership with, well, originally it was going to be my sister, my best friend Megan, and myself. And we were going back and forth of different places that we could do it. At one point, we were looking at doing the training in Italy. I think we were looking at like Latin America. And then my sister brought up the day of like, maybe we should go to some Nepal, because that's probably going to be closer to where the roots of yoga actually are. And I thought, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's get closer to that. It's probably going to be a more authentic experience. And so at that point, it became clear that my sister was more interested in doing a retreat experience. And then Megan and I wanted to do a teacher training. And so we split off, and I kept saving for this yoga teacher training, not 100% sure of when it was going to happen, but I had a ballpark of, okay, I think I need like $5,000 in order to afford the training itself, the flights, and food and such while I'm there. And then a couple of things happen. One, about a year and a half ago, Megan was killed in a car crash and she was hit by a drunk driver. And that was devastating, especially at our age, right? She's my age, so 27 at the time. And it really shocked me, and still to this day motivates me to do things in just such a different way because you don't know what's going to happen. And I knew that I still wanted to do this training, but it had a whole different meaning for me, that it wasn't just about the idea of following through on a goal, but how can I do this in honor of someone that has inspired me so much?
Well, she was with you. She was with you.
Yes,
During that whole
she was
time,
with
I
me.
can feel it and I can see it. And so it was, yeah, I remember that time. And I'm glad that you got to honor your relationship and your plans. But her soul definitely got to experience it as well.
Yes. Yes. And there are definitely moments when I could just sense that she was there. And so I kept saving. What happened was I got an invitation from one of my good friends from grad school to his wedding. And at the time that we had met, he was living in Minnesota, but he was originally from India. And so the thought, of course, occurred to me that, well, geez, if I'm going to fly halfway around the world to go to this wedding, which was just not even a question in my mind, I might as well just tag this yoga teacher training on. And so that really pushed it up in my timeline. I wasn't planning on going until the year afterwards, 2024. But that's what I did. Is I had the wedding and then I had the yoga teacher training for the following 4 weeks after, and it was incredible.
I have a couple of things. The first thing I really want to say is that you took the opportunity. You looked at what possibly could be a challenge, even though you were going to be there for your friend, but you took an opportunity to say, I'm moving my timeline up. So you took a challenge and turned it into an opportunity, a win, an adaptability moment, which isn't that what we're talking about in our life, is how can we adapt quickly to the changes or not live in the angst of a problem instead of it just being an opportunity to learn or shift. So thanks for sharing that with me because I get to again see the experience and watch how we magically, and I say magically because it seems effortlessly, not that it is behind the scenes, but it does seem like sometimes the things that when we shift, it seems effortlessly. And to be able to share that with others is a great gift.
One of the things that I love best about being my own business owner is the creativity that I get to bring to this work. And one of the things I don't often talk about in terms of what is available for people and how they can engage in this work is through my newsletter. So I strive to publish a newsletter every quarter. And this is a space for me to give a little bit more of an overview and also a deeper dive into what I'm creating and how people can get involved in that. So that's the space where I will publish a little bit more about the online courses that are coming up. If there's a wait list that's available, that is always a good space to find out. Sometimes I'll talk a little bit about maybe coaching specials that I'm doing, like if there's a discount or a promo or something that is being offered on a limited time. So I just wanted to share that with you, that is a resource that's available and it's completely free. Subscribers are known as members of the Mezclada family. So I hope that you join us over there in digital space. It's a great way for you to stay connected. And I'll make sure that the link to sign up for the newsletter is included in the show notes for this episode, but then also future episodes as well. To sign up for the newsletter, just go over to the website. That's mezclada.co. And then you can just scroll to the bottom, or sometimes if it's your first time visiting there, we'll have just an automatic pop-up that allows you to sign up. There's also a link on the upper right-hand side of the screen, and you can find out more there.
However, you said something a little bit ago that I think your audience is really going to love. And I'd like you to talk a little bit more about that and from a heart-centered answer, because you said pause. Do you remember what you said about pause?
Probably connected to the meditation piece and just what yoga forced me to do.
Yeah. So talk about, what does the pause mean? Because it is through everything that you do today. You show the pause. I got goosebumps right now because this just feels like really what people are asking. I firmly believe that 2020 happened because Mother Earth said, if you're not going to pause, I'm going to show you how. So talk about the pause and what that truly meant to you on a heart centered level.
Yeah, I mean, wow, what a great topic. I think there's so much to be gained from slowing down, silence, listening to your body. You can't do that when you are actively pushing, moving, taking in information, images, music from your outside surroundings. When you meditate, the idea is not to stop your thoughts. There's a big misconception about that. It's to allow yourself the opportunity to process what's happening and to focus on the one constant that exists within your body, which is your breath. When you get to a point where you can focus your attention on that simple movement of air in and out, this really magical thing starts to happen where you start to see that everything that you are perceiving around you, the reality that is in front of you, is all being created in your mind. And that took a really long time for me to understand. But it's been through that practice of meditation that you kind of just regroup and you recognize all the chaos and distress or grief or whatever it is that is pulling you out of this heart centered, gratitude loving, original human place, that you should be. It's all just in your head. And that's something that I've really loved about yoga, is that it's through that movement practice oftentimes that when you are just focused on the inhale and the exhale, everything else tends to just float away.
And it's the pause. It's the pause in our brain, the pause in our life. Yeah, that's some beautiful imagery. Thank you for sharing that, because I think that's one of the things that we all really need in our lives, is that opportunity to pause. I do want you to tell us a little bit about your instructor from India. How do you say his name? I read our notes. I was like, whoa.
Yes. I had a lot of instructors, actually. I think it was something like 6 classes that we would take in a day. So we would start at 6 a.m. and I'm going to butcher most of the names of these people, but we would start at 6 a.m., but we would start with our vinyasa class. And that was a certain style. There's just a certain sequence of patterns and movements that are associated with that. It's definitely a strength building class. And so we would have that class.
Was that a physical class or was it a mental building?
I think it's always both. I
Okay.
think that when you get to the point when you can withstand a certain level of discomfort, and this takes me back to experiences where I've been like mountain biking, for example, you learn to love the burn in your legs and not shy away from it and be like, yes, the lactic acid is building up and it's supposed to, because if it stops, my body will have cooled down and I'm not going to be able to sustain myself. Same thing happens in yoga, especially in vinyasa classes. You may be holding a pose, and the only thing that's going to allow you to keep holding the pose is the control in your mind of just being able to breathe through and be like, this is only temporary. I will get through this. It is a mind game in a lot of ways. So you're exercising a couple of things at the same time. And yes, strengthening the muscles in your body is one of them. So he was great. I mean, I think our first teacher, he could be very stoic. Like, he didn't show his emotions a whole lot, but you could sense there were these moments when he would start to reveal himself, the inner parts of who he was. And it's just to be able to see his smile, which was so rare. It was really nice. And he was always open to answering questions. And at the end of class, he'd always be like, "How are you doing? How is the body?" Because he knew that we were all just suffering and it was so exhausting. So we would have that class. And then after we had, I think it was maybe the pranayam class that we had in the mid morning. So Ekta, and listeners will get to hear an interview from her directly in a future episode. Just amazing. She focused a lot on this idea of control of the breath, and she would walk us through different exercises of first just coming into consciousness of what your breath is looking like in that moment. And you take your attention from the outside environment and then start to bring it into the body. And again, it's about that control of the attention. And so she'd focus on different exercises with us through that practice, whether it was maybe a sitting exercise, something where we are laying down. A lot of times she would talk about where you would have to place your hands on your body to notice the movement of air within certain parts of like your abdomen or like the thoracic cavity. And she takes her work very seriously, but she's very, very kind and very knowledgeable. Like her voice, I felt like I could have listened to her all day long. And I'm so excited that other people are going to get to hear that in an interview with her because just mesmerizing. And her accent is just lovely. So there was that one. And then we'd take a break for breakfast and then we'd come back and we would have a class about the anatomy class that we had next. And yeah, I don't know why all the names of these professors are failing me. I'll have to throw them all in the show notes. But we had our anatomy professor and she was really sweet, tiny woman, so knowledgeable about the body and the bones and the muscle structures. And we'd ask a question and she would give us 5 minutes detail about this thing that we were not expecting at all. It was really cool. And I think we focused a lot on that in maybe ailments that people are dealing with and what is causing that and how is it that our yoga practice can help maybe contradict or go against some of what might be causing that in the first place. I really enjoyed those conversations. And yeah, you could tell she just had a really deep love for her work, which is just evident in her lectures. Then we had an alignment and adjustments class with Master D was his name. That one I don't forget. And wow, what an infectious laugh and personality. He's so open and just ready to make fun of himself at any given moment. You would even just him drawing these diagrams on the whiteboard of the yoga posture. He would just be laughing the entire time because he'd be like, yeah, that's not really correct, but it's good enough. And he would always joke kind of with the folks that were from like China. He'd start speaking to them in a different language because he had taught yoga there for a while during the pandemic. And yeah, just a really open personality and very knowledgeable as well about how is it that if someone is in a certain pose and you as an instructor need to go up and kind of physically move a part of their body so that it can get into the correct position. How do you do that in a way that prevents the first person from falling down, but also makes them feel safe? Because a lot of times that physical contact for many people, depending on where it is that you're putting your hands on their body, can be really uncomfortable. And so just establishing that trust is really important. And I gained so much out of that class. We had evening classes as well. So we did like our philosophy class, yoga philosophy. And then right after that, we did meditation. Those two classes were taught by Sadhu Shri. And whoa, what a delightful human. Also someone who I had the pleasure of interviewing for the podcast. Such a young spirit. Just like sprightly, I think is the way that I would describe him. You cannot make up this stuff in terms of what people would wear and just the differences in their voices and their attitude. I just felt like there was so much diversity in all of the people who taught us. And I don't know if this is something about Indian culture itself, but everyone seemed to be so comfortable in their own skin and just being their authentic selves. There was not this sense of insecurity that I feel like I've picked up from other people. It's an energetic thing, right? You can see it in the way that they carry themselves. And all of these instructors, they just know who they are. And that's a really big theme in yoga philosophy, is this idea of know thyself. And I can't help but wonder if it isn't as a result of their own practice that they've cultivated that sense of confidence within themselves, that it doesn't matter what they're wearing or how they show up, they just own it. And that was really expansive to witness.
So I'm wondering if that's one of the biggest lessons, because that's what I was going to ask you. From all of these, which teacher inspired you the most? And what is one of the biggest lessons you took away?
So I would say probably Sadhu Shri was the person that inspired me the most for many reasons. The first was probably in the nature of what he was speaking about. I do find that I quite enjoy having these more philosophical conversations. And so much of what he was describing are the core tenets of yoga philosophy, affirmed the beliefs that I had already cultivated within myself about what spirituality means to me and how I want to live my life from this place of trusting in something bigger than myself. And so I just felt like I walked away from class with this just inspired feeling within myself that, wow, I don't know that I'm ever going to know the answer to this question, but I still want to think about it for hours and hours after we've had the conversation. I just love that stuff. So that was one part. It was just the nature of the content that he was covering. But then the other part was just how he shows up in the world. First of all, best laugh ever. If someone could just record his laugh and figure out a way to have that on repeat or on demand, I just don't imagine anyone having a bad day with that laugh. So there was that. But then you could just sense this joy. It's just, there's this really deep joy within him. And I'll never forget when we did the meditation class that I was actually co-teaching with one of my classmates, Luna. She guided this beautiful meditation where we had to stand across from another person, and she so lovely guided us through this, where you had to start with an affirmation. She said, tell the other person across from you 3 compliments, 3 things that you love about them. And because I was also teaching the class, I wasn't necessarily going to participate. But then because our professor was there, I was like, we should just do this. So I'm standing across from my professor, and this is Sadhu Shri, right? And the only thing that I see in his eyes is joy. That's the first time that I've ever seen that. There was nothing else that I saw. It was just pure joy. And I feel like that is the energy that he emanates and what he brings to the world. And I think that that is something that I can only hope to cultivate within myself. And similarly, just affect the people around me with, yeah, just that light. It's so great. This episode of the Transcendent Farmer podcast is sponsored by Massage Alchemy Botanicals and Turkey Road Farm Products based in Castleton, North Dakota, and owned by Shannon Radcliffe Beach. Shannon is an organic farmer, herbalist, massage therapist, and earth mother. Her mission is to promote health and wellness by connecting people with the healing power of plants. To achieve this, Shannon crafts herbal remedies and products made from the herbs and berries she grows on her farm, as well as hosting events and classes that teach practical herbal knowledge and how to live more harmoniously with the cycles of nature. Find out more about their products and services by visiting their website or following them on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube.
I'm loving that because that's actually one of my personal goals. About 10 years ago, I said, I want to bring joy to everybody I come across, and I want to exude it on every cell in my body. So now I'm hoping you got some videos to show me Adu Shri. He sounds like an exciting person, like somebody I just want to sit in a room with. I don't even have to have a conversation, just sit in the same room. Tell me a little bit more then about Luna and this assignment, because there were some other things that I wanted to ask, like, did you have to choose a roommate? Was this a package deal? If somebody was looking, how would they be able to actually see where you went and made those connections so they themselves could book a trip if they wanted to?
So Luna is definitely a soul sister. She's originally from Mexico and she now resides in Bali. And it was just immediate, like our connection. We ended up getting assigned to work on both of our final assignments together. So they paired us up with another member of the yoga teacher training. And we taught both an asana class, a movement on, on the mat, and then we also taught a meditation class. The idea was that you had 15 minutes each, I believe, for the meditation class. And then I believe it was maybe 50 minutes total to teach the asana class. And then you would have time for feedback from other students so that you could figure out how would you improve. I will admit, I totally botched my asana class. It was, in my mind, just an epic failure. And I don't really understand why, of all of the moments that I have not been nervous, that was the one that just overtook me. Everything that I had rehearsed went out of my mind. And we did a sequence where you have to do at the beginning these sun salutations. And for that one in particular, what can be confusing is understanding, okay, when you put your left leg back, do you bring the left leg up again, or do you switch sides and bring the other leg up? When you're so nervous in front of everyone, I just forgot which leg did I put back and which one comes forward. And we did a few sequences, but I just kept going because I was like, my body isn't warm enough yet. I know that other people's aren't. And I even forgot the warm up, and then I ended up putting it after the sunset. It was just a mess, just a mess. But Luna did great. She did really good. And so for the meditation, we did two separate ones, but they were kind of stacked back to back. So Luna did hers first, and it was a hugging meditation. So the idea was that you say these affirmations to the person across from you. I'm sure that the idea behind that was really just to establish that trust and comfortability with the other person. And granted, we knew each other pretty well at that point. So I think that that was conducive to what this experience that we were creating. And then you would give the other person across from you a hug. And the idea was that you wouldn't let go of them right away, but that you would continue to embrace that other person in your arms. And there's lots of research out there about the power of hugs and oxytocin, these chemicals that get released when you are embracing someone else. And it's not from this romantic standpoint. It's really just feeling safe and comfortable in the arms of someone else. And even in the beginning, when she was reading off these affirmations that we were supposed to repeat in our heads about loving yourself and giving yourself a hug before we even got into the point of hugging another person, I'll never forget. There were actually tears streaming down my face when she read that. And apparently on that day, that's just what I needed. And so that was super powerful. And then I ended up reading a pre-done meditation, if you will, one of my favorites by Bob Proctor, his abundance meditation, because I've listened to it at least 100 times and it doesn't get old for me. And I felt like it would be something that other people would enjoy experiencing as well. And you asked a couple of questions about if somebody wanted to have this experience, how would they go about doing that? What were some of the considerations that I had to take into account when I decided to do this? Budget, obviously, was one of the things that I was looking at. I think it was like $1,400 or so, if I recall correctly. Maybe $1,500 with some of the extra add-ons that I put in, which was like getting a heater in your room, cost extra. I also had a room by myself, which was more expensive than having a roommate. And I did that purposefully because I knew that I was having to work remotely while I was still on this journey and on this trip. And I knew that I didn't want to inconvenience someone else by me having to be on Zoom calls at 10 o'clock at night while everyone else was going to bed. I also really enjoy my alone time, and I'm generally an introvert and people exhaust me. So I wanted to have that time for myself, for reflection, writing, whatever I needed to do. And it was worth every penny to have my own space. I really enjoyed that. Rishikesh. Let's talk about Rishikesh, because apparently I found out that it is the yoga capital of India. There are, I think they said, more than 400 schools of yoga in this city, which, who knew that something like that could even exist? It's crazy.
400 schools?
No joke. No joke.
That's kind of cool, but wow. I would have never thought that.
Yes. So you have this really interesting mix. I mean, okay, let's talk geography first, because that's what makes this city very unique. You have the Ganga River, which is just this beautiful, flowing, slow river winding right through the heart of the city. And all of these buildings are sort of built up around the sides, but it's just exquisite. The color, even of the water, is so unique. And I'm sure it has to do with the mineral composition of whatever sediment is at the bottom of what gets reflected up from the light. But yes, you just sit by the river and you can just feel that you are connected to something that is bigger than you. So that was really special. And that was one of the few things that I think kept me recharged throughout the time. That even though this yoga school wasn't located right on the water, I would always take a break in the afternoon between classes. I'd bring my laptop with me because I still had to work. I'd go down to the river, sit there, watch the water, and yeah, it was so peaceful. So that's one cool thing about the geography. But culturally, you have these two kind of dynamic influences that really support the economy there, aside from all of these maybe small businesses and the shops and such that are catering to the tourism. There's all of these adventure sports that are happening there. So they've got the rafting, they have different maybe aerial related things, or the skydiving or jumping off a bridge or this giant swing. And then you've got this crazy influence of all these yogis. I don't think I saw once on a menu meat. And that was something that I was not expecting. Everything was vegan, vegetarian, all the amazing superfood smoothies that you could imagine. They exist in this town. And, all the shops on the road are selling yoga mats, and the library, like the bookstores, have all of the amazing stuff related to spirituality, yoga as a philosophy, any of these kind of mentors or gurus, right? You can find it in this town. Very, very cool.
So, are there 400 different types of yoga thoughts then? Or because that just, I'm thinking colleges, I'm thinking trade schools, you know, pretty much in the States, they have a set that they have to follow, but I've seen that there are different types of yoga philosophies out there. So, how does that play into all of this? And that's interesting enough to know that this is the center and the food. That's another question.
Yes. Yeah. So I would say, in terms of diversification, these schools aren't necessarily different from each other in teaching different kinds of yoga philosophy or even asana practice.
Mhm.
So there's probably, I don't know, maybe up to like 15 different styles that you might find of the asana practice. And each of the schools would probably focus on one or two different styles that they teach. What I studied is definitely a more traditional hatha, and then ashtanga vinyasa were the two that were covered in this school. Others might have focused more on yin yoga, or some people would even specialize maybe in doing something about like a yoga for people with physical disabilities. There's always going to be that level of diversification. But I get the sense that when it comes to the philosophy side of things, if I recall correctly, I think there are 6 schools of thought as it relates to yoga philosophy. So a lot of the scriptures and such, that hasn't changed and it won't change. And I think there's a standard around teaching some of those elements that people are probably following. Of course, the lectures are going to be different depending on who your professor is. And what I did find interesting is that a lot of the professors through this program, they are hired at different schools. So that also, I think, helps to keep some of that stuff consistent from one school to the next, is that they're all kind of being taught the same thing. But yeah, I think the duration is also probably what distinguishes some of this. It could be that the level is one. So 200, 300, 400, 500-hour yoga teacher training. Those are going to be, in terms of advancing your knowledge, you have to go through one before you can go through the next. And so that would be one. But then if you want to do a 2-week intensive, you could do that. If you want to do a 4-week intensive, like what I did, you could do that. They have weekend classes that you could take online as well, that some of these teachers offer.
Wow. So I know that I have lots of questions, but I definitely want to have some time is because you keep saying too that it's an instructor school. So will you be offering this in your services coming down the road? Is this something that you're hoping to bring to the rest of us?
Indeed. Thank you for asking that. I do believe that I didn't invest all of that time and energy just to keep it to myself. I'm a firm believer that anything that I learned should be shared in the degree that I can, whether it's through my writing, videography work I do, consulting, however that shows up. And I think there's a lot that farmers can gain from understanding more about yoga as a philosophy, as an awesome practice, as a way of life. I know that it's definitely going to be informing the curriculum that I'm building out for my online courses and bringing some of those elements in. I just started an audiobook this morning actually by Jay Shetty, and for anyone who's listening that is familiar with his story, he spent many years living in India in an ashram with monks. And the audiobook he's talking about is love. And he just has already pulled in some of these terms from the Vedas, which is one of the old scriptures or historical texts within yoga. And so it's very cool, right? People are able to take these ideas and apply it in the real world in modern day times. And that's what I want to be able to do as well, is make this accessible. I don't want it to be something where farmers can't see themselves within this space. I know that there's a lot of stigma around yoga and the concepts associated with it, or maybe who is drawn to it, that it's just a bunch of these hippie people that are doing weird stuff and drinking kombucha, which I'm a fan too, that we do that. And you can also be a farmer that is working your ass off in the fields and wants to invest in injury prevention, right? Like that's what this is about. And it's also about sustaining your mental health in the long term. And I think a lot more farmers need that.
I'm really glad that you started to go down this little rabbit hole, if we can say that, because I think that yoga tends to be one of those things that's out here. So if I'm digging in the dirt and I'm loving the dirt and I'm loving the food I'm producing and loving my community, how do they go? And so one of the things that you're talking about that you just said is, how can I help my body to not get injured? So can you bring it from a concept down to a practical, even a couple of practical steps that people could see how yoga would actually benefit them as a farmer or into the food realm?
Yes. So, one of the biggest things that yoga helps you do when you are consistently practicing it is stretching your muscles in the ways that will keep them limber and having the flexibility within your body, especially when you're dealing with these repetitive movements that are often associated with farm work, whether that's planting or seeding or harvesting, weeding. You find yourself, squatting, standing, lifting heavy things, but we aren't necessarily always told how to do that in a proper way. Like, which muscles should you be using to lift this thing? And if you are focused on sort of cultivating that yoga practice, a lot of what we talk about is using your muscles, not your bones, as part of that movement. And so what will happen as a result of practicing consistently is that you'll start to recognize the difference between when you're using your muscles to do a certain action versus kind of having it be more lax, and you're actually using your bones and you're putting more pressure on the joint spaces, which can lead to injury. So a practical thing that I would suggest is to start the day. Sun salutations are amazing. And there's different styles that you can do, but you'll be able to find anything on YouTube that's just a basic sun salutation practice. You can follow along. It'll give you a nice visual. But the idea is that you're usually bending your upper body forward and then standing back up again. And that movement in your back is really important because it's circulating blood within your brain in ways that it wouldn't normally be, maybe first thing in the morning. So you're creating more blood circulation in that part of your body, but then you're also moving these parts in your spine that would also ordinarily just kind of be stagnant. And so it creates a lot more movement. Also, it's really good for your digestion. So that's super helpful. It will oftentimes open up your hips, which is really important as well, especially women. We hold a lot of tension in our hips, and it often is not, it's kind of neglected because a lot of the exercises and stuff that we see out there, they focus on building up the muscle and strength, but not necessarily opening places that are closed. If you find yourself, maybe you're a farmer with a day job where you're at a computer desk for most of the day, and then it's sort of in your off hours that you're working on the farm, which I know many people do. A lot of times we aren't conscious of the way that our chest becomes closed because our shoulders are being drawn towards this computer screen. We're often kind of leaning forward. And so when you start to practice these heart opening postures within yoga, you'll find, and this is connected to the heart chakra as well, is that your shoulders will start to sit further back, which is where they should be. And it creates this space within your heart, which you'll know, like when you see someone that is confident in themselves, they carry their body differently. And it will create that within yourself. But then again, it will prevent injury in that upper body place. It's going to shift energy as well. And potentially, I mean, a lot of people have experienced this when you do heart opening postures, which, as an example, people might not know, that could be like a camel pose. It could be maybe a bridge pose, wheel pose, where you're exposing your chest basically to like the open sky. It's a very vulnerable position, and some people are not comfortable with that. But as you develop that practice of getting more comfortable in those movements and spaces, you will find that it translates to interpersonal interactions that you have with others because they can sense that you're holding and carrying that part of your body differently. Hopefully, those are a couple of things that can help you understand why is this important and what are a couple of things that you could start with.
I'm going to go into, for me, when I was just listening to you, the open of the chest. And when I'm dealing with somebody who's telling me about their food and how they grew it, I'm going to be attracted to somebody that has an open chest that's authentic because in that they are confident in what they did, and that translates without them ever having to say a word. So their products to me even hold some of that confidence in it. So even on a tomato, sounds crazy, but I would rather have tomatoes from somebody who's in that and trusting themselves because I know that that tomato, as I eat it, I'm ingesting their confidence. I'm ingesting what they've given into that plant for me to eat. And so that might be one of those things too.
I'm feeling so inspired by this conversation, and I hope you are as well. I wanted to take a moment to give a shout out to one of the Transcendent Farmer podcast's newest sponsors, the Fargo-Moorhead Wellness Collective. The FM Wellness Collective is a community of wellness practitioners in the Fargo-Moorhead area dedicated to supporting and empowering one another. They serve as a reliable resource for the community to connect with wellness professionals, making wellness more accessible and strengthening the culture of well-being in the Fargo-Moorhead area. Learn more by visiting the links in the show notes or finding the collective on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn.
How does it play in? What, because we think sometimes just because I want to do this doesn't mean that it works. but we're showing how it all transcends into different fields. We tend to isolate ourselves. And what I really see you doing in your work and what I'm just hearing is how this really wraps around and how we are a community, not just individual islands out in that community. The farmer brings the groceries to the grocery store and we buy it from the No, I want to hear, I want to see where my food came from. I want to know how it nourishes my mind, body, and soul, which leads me, I want to know about the food. For all of you that don't know, I am a foodie at heart, and so I have been waiting for this conversation so she could tell me about the food and I could be excited and let my juices flow in my mouth. Tell me about the food.
Yes. So I had a couple of different experiences on that front because the first week of my trip, I was at this wedding. And so it was a lot of banquet type food. We ordered in room service, and I was just like, that's a whole other story that we'll have to get into at some point. But what I really loved, I mean, there's so many elements. So, like breakfast, for example, is so savory in India. And I loved that. You would have some kind of like a bread product at any given meal, whether it was like roti, for example, or paranta. And I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but they're like these little pancakes that they would fry in a pan, and not the same kind of pancakes that you might expect in the US, where it's this big, fluffy piece of bread. It was much thinner than that and very hearty, though, because I just sensed that there was a lot more whole grains in what we were eating, because you would just eat one and you would be satisfied. So I really appreciated that. They also have these things where it's almost like this white, kind of puffy bread, if you will. And that would oftentimes be paired with these different curries and sauces. In the morning time, they had another one that was almost like a fried donut. You could even maybe make it equivalent to like a fry bread, Indian fry bread. And then again, you'd have like maybe a veg based curry that you'd put on it. Sometimes there were red sauces, sometimes there were more like creamy sauces as well. But just the diversity of all of the spice mixes in these different sauces that you could put on was glorious. And I just talking about it makes me want to go to an Indian restaurant right now and seek that out soon. But yeah, breakfast is amazing. Oftentimes we'd have fresh fruit available. At the yoga teacher training itself, something I really fell in love with was their morning porridges. And they would have a couple of different types, but cardamom was the primary flavor that they would use in a lot of these sauces. And just the creaminess of it. Sometimes they would even do vermicelli noodles with this cardamom milk cream, and wow, just amazing. Especially on some of those cooler mornings, having that hot porridge was excellent. They'd also serve chai. That was often like a special treat. So maybe once a week, once every 2 week and a half, I would say, they would serve us chai. And I think a big thing about the idea behind that was they didn't want to be emphasizing or maybe perpetuating people's addiction to caffeine. So they would often give us herbal teas in the morning, which I really appreciated. And I've always been a tea fan, always been a chai fan. Chai is very different in India. It's not sweet and sugary. It's not mostly milk. It's mostly black tea. It can be spicy, and it's usually a very small quantity as well. And that's something that's always going to be different, I think, between the Western world and the Eastern world. It's portion sizes, right? They would serve them in these little tiny cups for the most part. And I remember it was a bit of a shock when I first ordered one. I was really excited, and especially about trying chai in different parts of the country. But I was like, wow, this is bitter. This has absolutely no sweetener. And so the expectation is actually that they don't sweeten it and that you add in your own to taste. And so I definitely didn't have most of my chai without something, but very good, very strong. And then my experiences here in Australia. have just been completely different. They don't know how to make chai here. I'm just going to say that. So breakfast is amazing. Always have fresh fruit. And then lunch, they would usually do something a little bit lighter and I think that the intention behind this was because we would have an afternoon asana class. They didn't want us to be super full and heavy going into that. So it'd often be a rice-based dish. And again, lots of different types of curries that they would serve with that. And then they would do some kind of a fresh salad on the side, usually like a vegetable based salad. I know some of my favorite was like an almost a shredded cabbage salad, which was pretty bright. Sometimes they would do stuff with like quinoa and chickpeas. And then other times it would just be some chopped up fresh fruit as a side dish as well. And then dinner was often the heaviest meal of the day, usually roti. So they're bread kind of in pancake form, kind of like a crepe, if anyone is familiar with that. And then, yeah, serve it with some kind of a saucy thing. Sometimes they would do something a little bit different and they'd serve us these burgers that weren't made with meat. I have no idea what they were made of. I think it was almost like a veggie burger type thing. And you could just feel they were trying to do this American thing because they'd also serve us this like chocolate shake as a drink, which wasn't even like a real shake. It definitely wasn't ice cream. I think it was just milk and maybe like a chocolate powder or something like that. But yeah, that was good. And I didn't have any sweets during that time. I think that was something I didn't realize how almost addicted to sugar I was until I suddenly had it sort of taken away. And I didn't have a craving for sugar, which was also astounding. I'm not really sure what happened. Yeah, I didn't want it. And maybe it's because I was eating so healthfully and moving my body so much and staying so hydrated that it almost felt like filling my body with that would taint it.
It could. It could. I'm wondering too if some of the spices didn't satisfy the taste buds in your mouth that you didn't need to.
Yeah, could be. I don't know. And I felt great. No, I mean, I think that I got the sugar I needed probably through breakfast, in all honesty. And that was enough.
That's good. Because now I did hear that cardamom is really good for people who have issues with sugar and want to get off. And using that in your rices or different foods to help your taste buds and your body to get off of sugar. So I don't know. I haven't dug deep into it, but I really like that. You had just scheduled times for food and it was perfect timing. These are a question, even though it's coming off as a statement. Was it perfect timing for your body in the process if they were scheduled? So, like every day at noon, you had lunch. Every day at 5:30, you had dinner, or whatever.
Yeah, so I would say not at first because I think I was still getting a sense of how much I needed to eat before I was going to have food again. And I'm really glad you brought this up because I didn't realize prior to this experience how much of my mental activity was being eaten up by the thought of, do I have enough food packed? When is my next meal going to be? Meal prep questions about where the food was going to come from, how much it's going to cost, these elements of my budget. And then I suddenly find myself in a place where I know I'm going to have 3 meals a day at these times. I don't have to think about meal planning, none of it. It's been paid for. And that freed up so much freaking energy in my head. I had no idea. And I feel like there was a part of me, and this could be just from childhood, but this scarcity mindset of like, I don't know what I'm going to eat again. So I need to plan accordingly, or just I'm always mapping it out in my head of what do I need to do to ensure that I'm feeding myself well when I'm hungry, essentially. And so I definitely ate too much the first few days, partly because it was delicious. And I also wasn't really sure if some of the yoga classes were going to be so grueling that I would pass out if I didn't have enough food, kind of a thing. and very quickly learned that eating a lot of food made doing those classes very uncomfortable. So I feel like from the beginning to the end, I kept eating less and less and less. And I was fine with that because I knew there's more where that came from. And if I really need to, I can go buy a snack outside of our yoga school and just go find something. But yeah, I felt like the timing ended up working out just fine. I mean, when you get up at 5:30 a.m. and then you've done this really intense class and then, for your body, then you have another class that's more focused on mental stuff, and then you have breakfast, you're very hungry by 9 o'clock.
Oh, I bet. I bet. That's a great time for it. But you said something that triggered some thoughts about the amount of food that we are used to eating in the West versus the East. And so that conversation to me is really amazing. And when we free up our mind to not have to worry about those things, how it changes us from scarcity and dare I say gratitude and comfortability, like a security almost. Can you talk a little bit about how that felt for you?
Yeah. I mean, it definitely makes me reflect on the economic situation of others, and that if that's what I was experiencing, and I would say I'm by no means, I'm not in a situation where I don't feel like I have enough money to buy food, but I certainly don't feel like I have the financial sufficiency or the finances to be eating out every day. And I do keep a rather tight budget. And so, I mean, food is a big part of what we spend our money on. But I think that, yeah, when you can be in a place financially or whatever, even if it's not that you have the finances, but you're surrounded by people who are supporting you in that way. Maybe it's your mom. Maybe it's a family member that's cooking meals for you and you know that it's going to be there. That's huge. And I don't think that that's something we always consider, especially when we're mapping out like what's our dream life look like? What does stability and support really look like? It may not always be in having the dollars and cents, but the food on the table, and maybe I'm not paying for it, maybe somebody else is providing that to me, but it was a game changer for me, and it has been interesting to transition into living with my sister and her boyfriend here in Australia because I feel like my budget kind of triples in a way because we are collectively doing our grocery shopping and meal prep. And it's not just my contribution that goes towards the weekly bill, it's theirs as well, which means there's much more diversity in what we eat on a day to day basis. We can be very creative. My sister is also a foodie. And so we nerd out about these healthy recipes that we can make together. But yeah, it is huge. And to be able to have the support, like just the other day, my sister, she was leaving for work and she's like, oh yeah, your salad is in the fridge. And just those moments when you're like, oh, I love having people around me that care enough to support me in that way.
I totally get it. And I miss our times at cooking in my house. So when you come back, let's make sure we date for that. Just to sit and do that. I'd like to talk a little bit about your experiences, obviously, but the things that you've brought back from the yoga structure and what you plan on doing for the future and in your business and working with farmers. As we end this and wrap this up, tell us how Emily is going to bring these gifts of this adventure to the people she serves.
I love this question. I've been mulling over this a lot, and I've always had the intention of being able to share this and integrate this. I wasn't sure how, probably 3 years ago, when I first set the goal of studying yoga, of what it would look like. But now it's become very apparent to me that if I find myself, which I do believe I will, find myself in a position of teaching others through online education and hopefully in person, honestly, because I do miss in person interaction, I would like to be able to integrate these concepts of yoga philosophy, meditation into a curriculum that supports farmers in building more holistic, financially and personally sustainable business models for their farm. And I've not seen that done before. So I'm hoping that this kind of pushes the edge of what I'm seeing in the industry, especially as it relates to farmer training, business development resources. There's a lot of stuff out there. But I think most people are focused on a lot of the technical aspects of what it means to be a farmer, how to get access to capital, all of that stuff. And when it comes down to it, our commitment to ourselves, our bodies, our family, our loved ones, and this feeling that we are connected to something bigger and that what we are doing is in service of something that's much greater than ourselves, I think that the potential that we have to impact others is somewhat limitless. And I want to be able to share that concept with people in a practical way so that they can take these concepts that they're learning about, put them into practice in their life in real time, come back, share what they're experiencing with other farmers, future farmers, and witness the changes that are happening in their own lives. Because I know I've seen it in my life. I've heard about a lot of the changes in other people's lives through podcasts, books, etc. And something tells me that this is what people are looking for right now.
I agree with you. I think that on this level, we're not looking necessarily, I mean, we are looking for strategic steps, but we're looking at how do we align with a greater purpose and then use those strategic steps. So, first, I want to say I'm honored. Thank you for this opportunity to interview you. I'm looking forward to more. I'm really looking forward to having a conversation with you about flower essence and growing your own medicine. So, with that, everybody have a fantastic day. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Dawn. If you love this conversation as much as we did, feel free to share the love by passing it along to a friend or fellow farmer, and be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss another episode. Until next time, friends.